So first of all, can I just get you to introduce yourselves for me? Yvonne, you first of all, please.
I'm Yvonne Hume, author of RMS Titanic, Dinner is Served and RMS Titanic, The First Violin. I'm also the great niece of John Law Hume, first violinist with Titanic.
And Nicholas?
I'm Nicholas Crafts, Professor of Economic History at the University of Warwick.
Okay, so I'll start with you, Yvonne. Just tell me briefly, you've researched this thoroughly, but just tell me briefly about your relationship and with the Titanic.
Well, I looked into John's life just over 4 years ago in great detail. Obviously, I'd always known about him. And I found out what a young, jolly man he was, a brilliant personality, very popular, and more importantly, a very, very talented musician from the age of 5.
And from what you know and the research you've done, do you know of any Scottish people other than John that were on the ship?
Yes, there was a steward, Thomas Mullins. He actually went to John's school. Although they weren't friends together, they did actually play in the same football team. And he's actually buried in Nova Scotia, the same place as John, at the Titanic Cemetery.
And what does this 100th anniversary mean to you?
It means the absolute world to me. I can bring to the forefront how heroic John was to play on when the ship was sinking.
And Yvonne, there is some very interesting history there in that he left a girlfriend, didn't he, back at home who was pregnant at the time?
Yes, that was Mary Costin. She was expecting their child, and no one knows if they actually knew that at the time. John was actually sailing on Titanic, and this was to be his last voyage before he returned home to marry Mary. So this is a very tragic story.
It is indeed. Professor Nicholas Crafts, can you tell me, do you know perhaps what the cabin systems on board the ship would have been like and whether they were a reflection of the society at the time?
Yes, I think we got a big difference there between first class, second class and third class. We're talking about a huge difference in the amount of money that people paid for those trips, probably a factor of 10 or more between the first and the third class, and the sort of service they got and the facilities they had reflected the difference in what they'd paid.
And what similarities are there between the economy then and today?
Well, the economy then, I think, was quite unequal. We are talking about a big gap between the incomes of the rich and the poor. And we're talking about moving to a similar distribution of income now, after a phase where things were more equal in the mid-20th century. At the same time, I think the important thing probably to remember is that everyone 100 years ago was living in an economy which was only capable of delivering an average income level, something like a seventh or thereabouts of what we enjoy. So being poor meant you really were pretty poor. You had a very hard time saving. You had a very hard time taking out any insurance or whatever.
And am I right in saying that John Hume actually did take out life insurance before he boarded that ship?
Yes, John Hume was quite unusual, I think. He had a Scottish widow's policy, which after his death paid out £100, which is probably somewhere between £9,000 and £10,000 in today's money. Doesn't sound like a lot. You might expect someone today to have a policy which would pay out quite a lot more. But by the standards of the time, it is quite exceptional. The normal person in those days probably had something which was more like burial insurance to try and defray the costs of a funeral, which might amount for a poor family to, say, £10, but to avoid the disgrace of a pauper's funeral.
Yvonne, do you think there is perhaps a reason why he may have taken out this life insurance?
Well, his stepmother, Alice, she had premonitions that John would die on Titanic. I don't know if that was put through to him, if he felt that. He was a very forward-thinking young man, and he was a very bright young man. I think perhaps he realised he did sail on the ships. That was his job, and he could well die on the ships, because we must remember, although they're very grand cruise ships, they are still ships and they still hit bad weather and they are still at sea. So he wanted to protect his family and make provisions for himself.
Professor Craft, just one final question for you. Do you think there are any lessons that we can learn from this today?
I think we have to learn that unexpected events do happen, and they can really create quite severe consequences for the families of those involved. So I think what we probably would learn is that because people now do have higher incomes, may be sensible for them to set aside more in the way of provisions against eventualities like sudden death.
Lovely. Well, thank you very much for your time today, both of you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.